Veteran career intelligence and special operations officer Bryan joins us now. Sir, thank you for rejoining the program. So the president now taking the lead role in negotiating with Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. He says talks are going well. At the same time, we know Iran's strategy in the past has been dragging all of this out as long as possible. What sort of leverage do you think the president will be leaning on to propel some quick movement on Iran's side?
The president's in a tough spot at the moment. From an instrument of power perspective, the diplomatic way is kind of not really working. The information way is definitely not working. The military way might work, at least in the short term, and that leaves economic. The economic way may work, but we need to understand Yemen is a poor country. You can't get water from a rock. You can't make Yemen more poor. Iran has sustained sanctions for decades now. They're resilient and they figure it out. So we're very quickly getting to a point of we got to change our tactics and change our mindset. And I've been speaking a lot about this, that the way that we're going about this whole problem needs to be adjusted a little bit.
What adjustments would you suggest making, especially at this critical, what feels like an inflection point in this conflict?
Yeah, punishing the Iranian people is not a good way to get them to revolt against the regime. So if we say that we need the people on our side, these tactics don't really do a lot of that. There's things that can be done to inspire the people and motivate the people to fracture the power bases, to fracture the mullahs, to fracture the IRGC, to fracture all the problems here. The other piece that we need to understand is that Iran doesn't really care about the nose-on-nose fight. That's not their way. The idea that we're winning against them militarily hasn't had an impact. We're making very similar mistakes, I would argue, to what we did in Iraq and what we did in Afghanistan, where we went to war in Afghanistan for 20 years and the Taliban didn't even notice. They didn't skip a beat after the withdrawal. So we need to understand better who we're fighting, what our end state is, and then how to get there a little bit better. And that may not be the way that we're used to doing it. We need to change our tactics a little bit, I think.
Well, let me suggest a tactic or relay one from Senator Ted Cruz. He says the U.S. should arm Iranian protesters for an uprising. Here's a bit of a clip we pulled for this.
Arm the protesters. This is something I've been calling for from the very beginning. Look, we're not going to send American boots on the ground. President Trump is not going to go down the road of the Iraq war and send hundreds of thousands of American soldiers into Iran. That's simply not going to happen. The obvious answer, Iran is a nation of 92 million people. Millions of the people of Iran do not want to live under these Islamist dictators who murder and torture and oppress them. We saw at the beginning of this conflict, heroic protesters stand up, and the regime killed somewhere between 10,000 and 40,000 of them. It is not fair to expect an Iranian citizen to fight with rocks against soldiers with machine guns. That's not a fair fight.
Do you believe this is realistic, feasible, and what are your thoughts on the risks also, including that any weapons potentially sent could wind up in the wrong hands?
Yeah, so I think what Senator Cruz says, as I've been saying exactly the same thing for months now. I think there's a lot of risk, but it's war, and this stuff is hard. So there's no such thing as a risk-free war. You could have one, but it wouldn't be very exciting. There's always risk. I would absolutely rather risk arming the people of Iran to fight the mullahs and the IRGC and the radicals, which is true, versus having domestic terrorism because we've galvanized the population against America. I think if we're trying to divide the regime and if we're trying to divide the regime and have an effect, well, you don't do that by bombing them and torturing, not torturing, but putting sanctions on them and making them starve some more. What you do that is you give them stuff. And that's not lollipops. You give them weapons. You give them weapons so they can fight. Yes, absolutely. There are second and third and fourth order effects of doing that. 100%, but I'd rather be facing that problem than some of these other problems that we're likely going to have to be dealt with if we don't find another way to do it, for sure.
Well, let's talk about some of our supplies, too, because this has been drawing major headlines as well. Does the U.S. have the munitions it needs in this conflict, and also to cover all other contingency obligations we have? There is widespread reporting that the Pentagon has burned through large quantities of especially these precision-guided missiles and air defense interceptors. And then we saw on Friday the president meeting with executives from some of the world's largest mining companies. So what are your thoughts on our military position as we sit today?
It's really not my area, but what I do know is we dropped a huge amount of ordnance. That's undisputed. A huge, large quantities of very expensive weapons. Those don't grow on trees. They don't. What we've learned through the war in Ukraine, where I've served for years now, is the volume of munitions needed to fight in today's war is fundamentally different than what America is used to. For 20 years, we've fought an enemy that didn't know what plumbing was and wore flip-flops. That's the Taliban and their affiliates in Afghanistan. Today's enemies, they've got the same stuff we've got, and in some cases, they've got better. So to use expensive weapons, which are hard to make, take time to make, and all those things, we should not be surprised that the stockpiles are being impacted, because it requires a large volume to do this. That said, I don't know, it's not my area, but I don't know that that it's as catastrophic as people say. There's a lot of things out there that people don't know about, a lot of technology out there that people don't know about, a lot of really amazing, we are still not the country to mess with, no matter how low our stockpiles are relative to what they used to be not that long ago. We're still the strongest military in the world. We still have more airplanes and everything else than everybody else has. We're still very well trained, and our technology, when you think about it, the B-2 stealth bomber, which is the most sophisticated thing in the air, sophisticated bomber in the air, that's 1986 technology. Imagine what's out there that we don't know about. That's before email existed.
Right.
Okay. So we need to keep things in perspective, that there's lots of really amazing capability that we have that the American public does not know about, that counters or mitigates the stockpile issue. I'm not saying the stockpile issue isn't real. It is real. To what extent and how bad and all those things, I'm not too sure. But I'm not panicking over our ability to fight and defend ourselves. I am panicking a little bit over our ability to plan and process the end state of war as it relates to modern day conflict. And that's what we're seeing play out.
All right, Bryan Stern, we'll be checking back in with you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.